Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Cassidy Diamond. I am the Associate Director of Public Programs and Events here at the International Documentary Association. We are thrilled to have you here for what is going to be a great conversation around Lady in the Dale, hosted and moderated by Inkoo Kang from the Hollywood Reporter. Before we get started, I just wanted to offer a brief land acknowledgement, as we always do here at the IDA. Today, I'm actually coming to you from Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is on the unceded land of the Tiwa, Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache people, who have been stewards of this land for generations. I would also like to offer some thanks to our sponsor, Variety, for bringing this series to you today. You can find all of our upcoming screenings at documentary.org/award spotlight. We have many more coming up through the end of June, so we're really excited. But that's enough for me. I'm going to hand it over to Inkoo, who's going to get this conversation started. Welcome, Inkoo.
Hi, now that you can actually hear me. Really happy to be here with what I have been told to describe as the greatest film entertainment of all time. The Lady in the Dale is absolutely one of my favorite documentaries I've seen in a really long time. And so I'm really happy to discuss the 4-part docuseries with its 2 co-directors, Nick Cammilleri and, wait, did I get that correctly? Yes. And so I'm absolutely happy to be here with Nick Cammilleri and Zachary Drucker. Hi guys, how are you guys doing today?
Hey Inkoo, thank you so much for having us. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for having me.
And also we're here with the Duplass brothers, Jay and Mark, who are the executive producers of this greatest film entertainment of all time.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate your introduction. You'll have my payment in your Venmo shortly. Thank you.
Good. Make it quick. So how did this project arise? Like, who was the person who was like, we have to make this documentary about Liz Carmichael, and maybe we should make this a 4-part venture?
Yeah, I guess I'll start. I spent about it started because I saw that Unsolved Mysteries episode from 1989, and I was just hanging out like 2 a.m. watching Lifetime, and it was like on, and then I kind of sat up because I love unique like subcultures and interesting characters, and I love enterprising figures that try to create something out of nothing, and I thought her life was just remarkable. And so I really thought I was just gonna read a book over the weekend and be done with it. And then I realized that there was just nothing on her whatsoever. Nothing existed. And it was to the point where I just started digging, and I'm a person who gets bored pretty quickly. So I was just never bored. Every time I would learn something, it would just be more fascinating than the last thing I learned. And it was just it was like the world's greatest onion. And I just dug and dug and dug, and it became. That's kind of the first part of your question, is really what that became over the years. And the second part of your question being like the 4-part series kind of originated from shooting and editing from 2014 to roughly mid 2019 was when I realized it was like that it was supposed to be 4 parts, because I had like a 4-hour cut, a Frankenstein kind of cut put together, I think, over that period of time. And so it was really more of, I think, like osmosis of seeing that it kind of broke itself evenly. I think her life did anyway, in terms of the structure.
What year did you watch that 1989 Unsolved Mysteries?
2011.
Oh, wow. Okay. You were watching some real old TV.
Yeah, it was quite, that period. It's awesome. Yeah.
Zachary, how did you get involved in the production?
I came on board as soon as the project landed on the Duplass Brothers Productions doorstep, and I was astounded to have never heard of Liz Carmichael. I'm a trans woman, and I am a deep enthusiast of the history of non-binary and gender expansive people through time. Liz Carmichael was never on any list that I had ever seen, and I was uh, skeptical at first, I think, because there are so many heroic uh, predecessors. And it's so interesting. Liz, in her time, was just characterized as a man masquerading as a woman to commit a crime or to evade authorities and all these years later, we see her story very differently. I was, just amazed at her ability to create and manifest an identity as a woman despite all of the kind of past troubles that were always going to catch up to her. Yeah, it was a wonderful opportunity to reframe history.
Did someone come up to you and say, like, we would really like you to co-direct? Or was it sort of more like, I will do this for nothing less than co-director?
Yeah, it was a journey. I don't know if Jay or Mark wants to kind of throw in their 2 cents about how everything came together. But yeah, it was a really kind of serendipitous confluence of things.
Yeah, I mean, this when Nick brought us this project, it was initially, so exciting because he had done all this tremendous amount of work. He basically lugged this story up a craggy mountain with about 12 cents and he did this thing all on his own for years and years and years. And it was clear he was sort of like on his last breath of being able to do this on his own. And he really needed help. And we wanted to be that infrastructure and that help for him. But at the same time, as sort of 2 cis white males, there's a question of, well, what can we do with authenticity to support this story, and it didn't feel like a story that we were in a place that we wanted to direct or felt like we had the bandwidth to direct. And so, we immediately approached Zackary as someone we felt like she's going to be a great consultant for this story. She is a trans historian. She'll probably know about this story. Jay and I were both embarrassed that we hadn't heard about this story. And then we approached Zackary and she's like, I haven't heard about this story either. She dove in 100% head first. And then, just speaking candidly, some projects come together really, really quickly. They just gel. And some projects take a long time to get right. And this project took us a long time. And it was a huge village of people, from editors, from producers at our company, from our other producers who are on board. They were with Nick before this project came to us. And we tried multiple different iterations of this project creatively, because you're dealing with, and I want to try and say this as clearly as I can without muddying it, you're dealing with an anti-hero protagonist of a sort, right? Which we haven't seen before by having a trans lead character. Whenever you get a character like this, the complicated hero that we've been doing in cinema for years with straight white males, it's a gold mine. You love it. Oh, he's complicated. He's a bad guy, but he's a good guy. But there was this complex nature of dealing with all of these things that Liz had done in her past, and how that caught up with her, and how basically the world had overcorrected that, particularly as you see towards the end of this documentary series, because of how they viewed trans women at that point. And so we felt, not only narratively, how do we get this right? How do we historically and in the realm of trans representation get this right? So we were feeling like the weight of this on our shoulders. And that really was the point where we felt like Zackary knows this stuff. Zackary feels this stuff. Zackary needs to be co-directing this. And it was just happening organically. She was just gaining more and more momentum and more authority, and her voice was just coming forward. And it all just sort of happened. We just looked around and was like, oh, this is what is happening.
I think that is one of the really wonderful things about this, because I feel like we get a lot of pop histories now, especially on TV and TV documentaries, where you're sort of like, I mean, like, I really love Apple TV's Visible, for example, but that's like sort of like a very straightforward narrative of progress of representation on TV, right? And I love that this was sort of able to say, like, yeah, trans people have been oppressed, but also trans people are complicated. Who knew? And so, yeah, I guess I wanted I guess I was wondering, like, if, like, can you talk a little bit more about sort of like that hesitation about presenting this non-role model figure? And like, it's also like a part of the documentary where I think you have talking heads, sorry, interviewees. I've been
We don't do talking heads in our documentary.
How dare you?
This is the greatest documentary and film entertainment of all time. Strike that from the record. Continue.
Yeah, like, is presenting a non-role model, or just like a really complicated anti-heroine, is that like, do you think it's necessary in terms of telling trans history? Can you sort of talk about that struggle a bit?
Yeah, I'll just kind of jump in there, because in the scope of trans representation, trans people have been so maligned, and our stories have just been done dirty for so many years, that there is this just deep desire for us to feel affirmed and validated in our identities as they are being kind of and over such a long period of time, trans people have always had doubt cast on who they are, and who, the gender that they're presenting to the outside world. It's and trans folks' ability to exist in public life is being contested in the sphere of public opinion, in national and state politics. So it is this very combustible time. And I think that it's not only necessary, but it's crucial that we be rendered with the full complexity of our humanness, and not kind of reduced to these needing to be respectable, needing to kind of fit into a box. We can only be fully human if we are flawed, and we're only relatable, and we can only build empathy for trans stories through presenting full humans. I think that Liz's story is so transcendent because it's relatable to anybody. I've always felt like the more specific you are, the more universal it is. And presenting these kinds of like very clean affirmational stories about trans folks is, I think that it's been necessary, but it's also limiting, and it doesn't allow us to actually be fully human or relatable to people. So Liz Carmichael is an unexpected protagonist in this era of trans folks being kind of contested and discredited in a large conversation. But in many ways, she's the perfect microcosm. She's the perfect kind of inciting person and moment. The story of Liz and Dick Carlson, I always reference that because it's the Liz Taylor, Richard Burton tabloid headline, the story of Liz and Dick, is in many ways what got us here today, with Tucker Carlson heading, an anti-trans kind of platform to millions of people every night of the week, and a mobilized trans movement that did not exist in the 1970s in Liz's time. When you follow the line of Liz and Dick, you get to where we are today, where the future is both better and worse.
This documentary is so full of surprises, and yet I sort of felt like when it's revealed that Dick Carlson, this man who has had this disproportionate effect on Liz Carmichael's life, is revealed to be Tucker's dad. It almost sort of feels like this shock at the end, and maybe even sort of like an outing. I guess I was wondering if you guys also thought of it that way.
I always likened it to sort of the end of Empire Strikes Back when you find out that Darth Vader is his father.
Yes.
It's really what it's meant to do there.
So I think Deleting the Dale sort of looks as fantastic as it is because of this really striking animation. It's like very sort of purposefully 2D. I think in my review, I likened it to like paper dolls, sort of. Where did this animation idea come from? And was that sort of like a way to like work around recreations? Can you guys talk about this?
Yeah, well, we created the series during COVID largely in terms of figuring out how to tell the aspects of the story that were just documents, that were just FBI files or, articles. And we wanted to create a treatment that reflected how Liz would tell her story. So jagged edges, things kind of cut out. Everything in the animation is paper-based. There isn't a single digital dissolve or anything digital. It's actually an analog. I mean, not entirely, but it's all very tactile. And we imagined that Liz would be cutting things out, and it would be a little messy, like she was in certain ways, and it provided a container of telling the story that would not have been there otherwise. And without the constraints of COVID, we may have, explored other options, but it was also a blessing to have this one roll of film from Colin Danguard, one of the photographers who photographed Liz, and we were able to, composite those images of her face to create many different expressions. And our animation team, Awesome and Modest, they just hit it out of the park. I mean, they were really incredible collaborators and took it to the next level.
Yeah, they did. And I mean, I think one of the other impeti, if that's a word, to for this style of animation is that we had so little footage of Liz. Just thinking back when Nick brought us the project, we were like, how can this be real? And he was revealing some of the secrets that would be unveiled. And we were, Mark and I and our whole team were just furiously Googling, and there was nothing there. But, I'd say one of the key things about this animation was bringing out Liz's personality, because, we had so little footage, and she was known to charm everyone in the room when she walked into a room. She's just wildly charismatic and super personable and super funny and fun, really fun. And that was also, I think, a huge part of the feeling that we wanted to create with the animation, and
that whimsy.
The whimsy of it. Yes.
When you get into documentary and you get into recreation, as we all know, it is a slippery slope into Nightline really quickly. You want to make something that is interesting, and you don't always have the high-end budget to do it correctly, and so we're trying to think creatively. And our editor Chris Donlin actually was kind of stumbling around with some things, and I remember he had those pictures, and he started in the editing machine, started taking images and moving them around on top of each other as like a temporary thing. And I remember he did like a little movement, a slow automated movement of something at some point, and we were all just like, it was all of us in slow motion just being like, whoa, yeah, what is that? This might be the thing. What did you do? And he's like, I don't know. And that's That's a testament to having like a big creative team with a lack of ego and just staying in there until you find this. I mean, we hammered this thing for a few years. There were, I feel like we would not be honest if we didn't say like there were just so many moments where we had cuts of this thing where we were just like, guys, I don't know if this is gonna make it. Is this working or not? What's happening? And you just gotta believe and you gotta stay in and that animation really was clearly like a little piece of luck. And then we pulled that thread and we found the right animation team and it just came through.
Nick, were you disappointed as an Unsolved Mysteries fan that you didn't have super cheesy 80s recreations?
I mean, it would have been fascinating, but it ultimately, I did make the joke once that Candy had the original screenplay called Bodywork that was made I think it was written in the 70s and then rewritten in the 80s. And I was like, can we get a hold of that? Is there a way we can do some of that? Like shoot some of that stuff? And yeah, I mean, that would have been cool. But I think ultimately, yeah, I agree. It's like going back to what Zachary said, which is like we get to live in Liz's shoes. So when she's like, all the Dales are on the road, there'll be a Dale everywhere, and you just cut. There's Dales everywhere. It's like it's the one-to-one correlation. You get to feel what it's like as Liz inside her mind, and I don't think you can do that with any other form.
Right before we started this discussion, before the camera started rolling, you had mentioned that you had gone to the Peterson Museum. I think it's like a car museum, like a car history museum in LA. Did you actually go inside the Dale and like, what did that feel like? Or even just like looking at it?
Yeah, I remember I've probably been inside that Dale maybe a dozen times over the last like 10 years. But the first time was fascinating. It's just like seeing it in the corner, and there was a tour going by, and that ultimately what led to Leslie Kendall's comment at the end of the series, because he's the one who told me that quote by saying some cars are important for what they are and some are important for what they aren't. And he was telling me that, and right as he was telling me that, a tour guide went by with a group, and they were like, hey, here's the car, and here's the car, and they walked right by the Dale. And then and here's another car. And then that's when Leslie told me that quote. And I remember thinking that was a really powerful moment of seeing like how thin that line is between what was and what will never be. It's like razor thin. And so just seeing it, I think really had some resonance to me at that time. And then, yeah, of course it depreciates in value. The more you see the car, the more you see the 2x4s and the rubbery window and nothing works. And they had to push it out and the wheel came off. It loses a little bit of its magic, but seeing it with Candy, I think was great because that was the first time she had seen it since it was, I think, it was at one of the auto shows that she saw it, and she said that was the first time she had seen it in over 40 years, and she was blown away. Her and her son Nathan got in the car, and they took a bunch of pictures, and she started crying, and it was just like it was a really important moment, I think, for her. And then later on, we got to see the other Dale car that the private collector owned, and we turned it on, and all the headlights came on, and it was just like it meant more for her to see it, I think, than anything.
Candy is Liz's daughter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I interrupted someone.
No, I was just clarifying that too. Throwing that out there.
Did anyone else get to go inside the Dale?
I think only the people who filmed it. I think Candy and Nathan, I think, for the most part.
And there's a few different Dales. There's a few different remaining Dales. I mean, one is owned by a private collector. There's one at the Peterson Museum, one at the Museum of American Speed in Lincoln, Nebraska, and now Liz's grandson has a shell of a Dale. So perhaps they will continue.
The good news is that Elon Musk is going to be sending one to the moon powered solely by Dogecoin. So
we need to put a Dale in orbit. That's for sure. We're going to get HBO on that. That should have been a marketing strategy for us.
I love that idea.
There were a lot of interviewees for this documentary, and I was definitely curious if there were certain people who were much more willing to talk or like much more eager to talk than others. I think because, as you guys have sort of mentioned before, there is this a scarcity of knowledge about Liz in the larger world. And so were there people who were really invested in her legacy? So yeah, but then I also noticed that like Liz had a lot of children, but I think only 2 appeared in the documentary.
Yeah.
I guess I start out by saying nobody wanted to talk to me for the first 5 years. I had to call one guy every Tuesday for over 2 years and then eventually trap him to get him to agree. And then when he did show up to the interview, he went to the wrong building and then tried to run away, and I had to chase him to his car. So I think that's probably the best encapsulation of no one wanting to talk to me. I often had to work with a producer, or he was a professor over at Rutgers University, his name's Dr. Emmons, and he often would send letters on my behalf saying, I'm a professor at Rutgers, will you talk to me? And then they would talk to him and then talk to me, because nobody would want to talk to me. So it was often there were times I had to send letter after letter to people until they would call me and tell me to stop sending letters, and that's when I would talk to them. But like nobody really wanted to talk to me. It just took a lot of, I guess you'd say, sweat equity to really do it. But I think there were only 1 or 2 people who made an active effort to want to talk to me. But it just took a lot of me realizing that I wasn't going away. And I think once that happened, because it was an embarrassment, I think, to a lot of people, it was a shameful experience that this car had not come to fruition, and the fallout that everything that happened with it. And it was that it could have been something great and it wasn't. So I think because it was a shameful or embarrassing thing, that nobody really wanted to talk about it. And I think also too, it took a lot of work talking to the Michael family over the years. I think we started our conversations in 2016. And we had to talk for years, and it took up until late 2019 until Candy shot their interview, and then Michael shot his.
Who was the person who was really eager to talk?
Mark McCarley, Jay Garner's defense attorney. I think that's because his son makes movies overseas, so I think there's a paternal aspect to it, I think. But he was also just an incredibly nice guy. I remember I showed up at his office and he wasn't there, and I was like, hey, we're supposed to be here, and he was like, oh, I never thought a guy from New Hampshire would actually show up.
Yeah.
And then 10 minutes later, he was at the office and we shot his interview, and he was always incredibly cordial every single time, and he's just like a very polite, nice guy. And that's really the one I think that stands out to me.
Was it hard to get Dick Carlson to participate?
Yes, that one took from 2012 to 2016, and oftentimes when he did talk to me, he was very nice. But then there was, we'll just say, complications in 2013, and then we didn't talk for a couple of years. He didn't really pick up the phone, and then about 2016, I kind of made a last ditch effort to get his interview, and I think the timing kind of worked out. But it ultimately was kind of a confluence of events where I was in his area. We were in the last leg of a trip, and it just happened. So, but when I met with him, he was, while not representing that on camera, he was quite cordial to me to do the interview.
I always came across as pretty cordial, that kind of like smarmy, like, oh, you can't ruffle my feathers sort of thing.
Yeah, I shouldn't.
Anyway, are you guys sort of interested in scammer stories, like in general?
Well, you got a pitch for us?
Any
Any seconds. Go ahead.
Sorry, I haven't developed my elevator pitch yet. I don't know. I saw Zackary crack a smile, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly something that captures people's imaginations about victimless crimes in which, people are not physically harmed. And Liz, was many things. She was not a lifelong con artist. After the Dale, she kind of moved on with her life and took accountability. She served time in prison twice. And I think, you know, ultimately really exonerated herself by doing the work of being a better human in her life. She was not perfect by any means, but none of us are. And that's what makes us human. You know, I'll also add that, you know, to the kind of questions about Liz's family, that, you know, many of her kids had tragic lives. You know, only 3 of those 5 children are living, and we were in touch with all 3 of them. But her grandkids as well, and one of her great nieces were really crucial in kind of gaining the trust of Candy and Michael. And it was ultimately their legwork and their desire to have their family's legacy kind of rectified. They too were, you know, ostracized as children in schools as being from a kind of criminal family once Liz was exposed and apprehended in the late 80s after the Unsolved Mysteries. And their lives were impacted by all of Liz's decisions, you know, decades prior.
Yeah, I would jump off with, I would jump off what Zachary said too. Like, I would just say like continuous action. I guess what you would call it, a social movement. Every person at once. I think it took everybody, all of us at once, to really, I think, push the Michael family and to, I guess I really understand that we all wanted the same thing. But that was how that conversation started. When I first reached out to Michael family, I reached out to Jerry Bouchard, Liz's granddaughter, first, because I felt probably the most connection, I think, to her. And also I told her, I'm like, I'm not a journalist, you know, like I'm not here to run over the same ground. And I think because it was, like Zachary said, everybody all together, like continuous action, just all of us together doing it. And it was Nathan Michael who said something like, I had never even heard that story until his mom told it at a family reunion or something like 2 or 3 years ago. He had no idea of anything about his grandmother. And so like none of them, it's not just restoring it, but none of them knew that story. They just would hear stuff and they were like, and yeah.
Many of her younger grandchildren didn't know that she was trans also. Yeah. Anyways.
Wow. You have this like really wonderful treasure trove of audio recordings of her voice. Where did that come from?
Are you deferring to me?
Yeah. I just spoke for a while. I felt like I was like,
no, you go for it. You tell them. I'm trying to. It came from a tape. There was one tape of Liz that we were able to find.
Yeah, it took me almost a decade to get it from the Peterson Museum, because every time I would show up to Leslie Kendall's office, they can't get that tape now.
And it was very sparse. You know, I mean, we stretched it as broadly as we could.
Yeah, to Zachary's statement earlier, I think it was one, I can't even remember, it was one 45-minute or 1 hour and a half tape, and it came from an employee who worked at 20th Century Motors who dropped it off in the 90s. And that was the one tape. There was possible access to other tapes, which we won't discuss, but that was the only tape that we had in our possession that we could get a hold of. And the rest of it came from, we had to create a book of Liz quotes, and then we had to hire voiceover actors to actually read the quotes. And so I can't do the math percentage-wise, but there's a significant number of quotes that are in the series that are taken using voiceover actors that aren't Liz.
Okay. I think one of the things that maybe there are so many surprises in The Lady in the Dale, but I think one of the ones for me was her really like unapologetic libertarianism, and Susan Stryker does a really wonderful job of like contextualizing where her libertarianism may have come from. But is that something that is more common in maybe trans people of that generation? I guess this question is mostly for Zachary.
I mean, there's no real way to answer that question, just because trans folks of Liz's generation were outliers, all of them, and satellites, and there was no real community for them to, I mean, and especially Liz, she was transitioning by her own means, very much outside of the parameters of the medical establishment. I mean, she was, you know, as we explore in the documentary, she was using, you know, veterinary estrogen for you know, it's at one point, or getting them getting hormones in Mexico, and medical surgeries, transitional surgeries in Mexico. You know, so she was I never saw any evidence that Liz was connected to other trans people, even. You know, I mean, she may have lived the entirety of her life, you know, only meeting a few trans people. There was no, you know, we never saw any evidence of that. We never even heard her mention Renee Richards. I mean, or vice versa. You know, there was no indicator that Renee Richards was aware of Liz's story either in my correspondence with her. You know, I think that it's hard to imagine today, because libertarianism has become such a right-leaning kind of faction in many ways, but it's so pervasive in the tech industry and in the entrepreneurial realm that, you know, it's easy to kind of situate Liz as an entrepreneur being a libertarian. I don't think the trans piece necessarily intersects with libertarianism. I mean, it's safe to say that, you know, probably the vast majority of gender expansive people in the US are left-leaning, and you know, their feelings about big government notwithstanding.
I think one thing that's a very noticeable and maybe sort of unavoidable about the documentary, about the interviews specifically, is that there is a lot of various pronoun usage. Maybe it's like one way of putting it.
Yeah.
I think Candy refers to Liz as her father, like sometimes. And I think Candy, if I remember correctly, it goes back and forth. And then, of course, there was a lot of the more sort of like tabloid journalism, like, or TV journalism, like right-winger people in the documentary also routinely refer to Liz as a man.
Yeah.
Can you give us sort of like a sense of like what your discussion was, and trying to think through like how much of this to put in, like how much of this to like not put in?
At one point, just for fun, we did a transphobia cut of every transphobic comment from all of the various subjects. We realized that there was so much of it. I mean, it was kind of funny. It was, I found it personally amusing, but it was such an onslaught, and it was so, I mean, like, we had to preserve some good guys in the story, basically. And ultimately, we use it very sparingly. Liz being misgendered. I mean, you know, Candy, I think when it comes to Liz's family members, they have their own way of seeing their parent, their grandparent, and that, you know, we can't like regulate how people use language. And transness means different things to different people. It means something very different for Dick Carlson, but the incredible kind of capacity for documentary to contain all of those truths and all of those realities and all of those ways of seeing, it gives you a very complex lens to understand transness and to understand what we're up against. There was a lot of material we could have used of, you know, less holistic ways of seeing Liz, but I think ultimately we threaded the needle. We didn't we didn't abuse that particular element.
Does anyone have anything else they want to add to any aspect of the Lady in the Dale? Anything I forgot to mention? Anything that sort of has been like weighing on you guys?
The only thing I'll add is that, you know, you asked if we were, you know, obsessed with shysters or whatever. I think for Mark and me, it really does come down to the most fascinating human beings. And when we made Wild Wild Country, there were a lot of comments about Sheila being one of the most riveting characters ever to appear on a screen. And Mark and I actually had the conversation with each other. Well, we you know, humbly agree, but we were like I think we peaked with Sheila, and then it wasn't long after that Nick walked in with Liz, and we were like, this is unbelievable. And I think just the power of her personality, her charisma, her survival instincts. She really invented for herself what it means to be alive and what it means to fight for what you want and what you believe in. And not all of it was pretty, but it was fun and fascinating. And I think it's really the engine of this whole show.
Sorry, that's my dog. Mark and Nick, do you guys want to add anything?
I was just gonna say, click this link to buy a Dale. But no, I'm just I agree with Jay. I think a lot of I would say I very much relate to Liz, and a lot of like even making the documentary was very much about getting by day to day, just doing what you can do. And I think like standing in trying to pull, I think everything together feels very much I relate to Liz in a lot of the ways that just getting by day to day is like really the most important thing in maintaining your self identity and keeping that strength, and like not letting your soul die, but you just keep moving forward despite all the obstacles. Yeah.
Well, thank you for letting our souls live, and thank you for bringing us these really wonderful stories. It was an absolute pleasure to have all of you guys, and I hope everyone out there has enjoyed this really insightful conversation. So thank you for watching.
Thank you, Inkoo.
Thanks,
for
Inkoo.
moderating.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.